As I promised you all, there was going to be a lot of research coming out on the breath, and still more research is going to continue to come out on the breath, and it's going to be this incredible path of discovery. It's sort of like if you're doing research on the breath right now, it's like just a wide open field and discovering new physiological parameters that the breath changes or whatnot, or investigating specific type of breaths. Today we're going to talk about an article that was also published a few days ago. This is an article that's titled "Breathing Practices for Stress and Anxiety Reduction: Conceptual Framework of Implementation Guidelines Based on a Systematic Review of the published literature." And this is from a first author by the name of Tanya Bentley, who's in the Health and Human Performance Foundation. Health and Human Performance Foundation. What a phenomenal title to a foundation. First of all, Health and Human Performance. Really conducive to just that, just the words, Health and Human Performance Foundation. We're going to discuss this. I'm going to read here the abstract and just show to what extent they did to look at the published literature that was out there and do this systematic review. Okay. So anxiety and stress plague populations worldwide. Voluntary regulated breathing practices offer a tool to address this epidemic. We examined peer-reviewed published literature to understand effective approaches to and implementation of these practices. PubMed and ScienceDirect were searched to identify clinical trials evaluating isolated breathing-based interventions and psychometric stress and anxiety outcomes. 2 independent reviewers conducted all screening and data extraction. They found 2,904 unique articles that met their initial criteria, 731 abstracts, 181 full text screens, and 58 that met all their inclusion criteria. So 58 articles that met all their inclusion criteria. Usually what the inclusion criteria are is a set of predetermined criteria that set a certain standard for the article. Okay. And so you have to meet these criteria to be included. All right. I'm not going to go into specifics, but every article at the beginning, or the systematic reviews at the beginning, set very clearly what those inclusion criteria are. Okay. So we talked about it in the previous study, right? The inclusion criteria were you couldn't be pregnant, you couldn't be on opioids, et cetera, et cetera. This was on the study that we looked at mindfulness and looking at, administering naloxone. So they set these parameters, and then they go look for studies that meet these parameters. And so it's sort of a screening process. All right. So out of the 2,904 unique articles that they found, or that they started screening, 58 meet their inclusion criteria. So you can see there's this really sort of filtering effect. 54 of the studies, 72 interventions were effective. So they looked, so out of all these different 58 articles, there were 72 interventions, of which 54 of those were effective. That is a pretty good percentage of effective practices. Okay. And they went on to kind of describe effective practices. Components of effective and ineffective interventions were evaluated to develop a conceptual framework of factors associated with stress, anxiety, reduction effectiveness. Okay. Before we get to the punchline, here's some stuff that you might have, you might be familiar with if you've listened to any of my talks or participated in this group. The rising prevalence of anxiety and chronic stress plagues populations worldwide. We've talked about this multiple times. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, anxiety disorders had already attained startling high proportions, affecting nearly 1/3 of Americans at some point during their lifetime. Since then, anxiety disorders have surged by an estimated 25.6% globally. That is a huge amount of people who are anxious and stressed. Anxiety and chronic stress impact physical, mental, and cognitive health, increasing the risk of cardiometabolic disorders, cancers, mental illness, neurodegenerative disease, and all-cause mortality. Chronic activation of the stress response. That's the fight or flight system, right? That the sympathetic system induces allostatic overload, a cumulative wear and tear on the brain and body that erodes resiliency and health. Common stress and anxiety treatments rely on external factors such as therapist or medication and can come with modest effect sizes or unfavorable side effects. Effective, accessible, and risk-free solutions are needed. Voluntary regulated breathing practice may offer such a solution. These practices draw on both modern scientific studies and ancient yogic pranayama concepts, with applications ranging from clinical anxiety treatment in adults to reducing stress reactivity in college athletes. Common voluntary regulated breathing practices include diaphragmatic breathing, paced slow breathing, breathing with biofeedback, alternate nostril breathing. Breathing practices, when used in isolation, have the advantage of being universally accessible, scalable, and cost-free. They are not limited by access to healthcare services nor burdened by side effects, and put potential treatment tools in the hands of the individual. Breathing practices' effects on the autonomic nervous system and brain may underlie their stress-reducing benefits. Effective breathing interventions support greater parasympathetic tone, which can counterbalance the high sympathetic activity intrinsic to stress and anxiety. Respiratory entrainment of brain rhythms offers an additional avenue through which breathing may influence neural circuit dynamics, cognition, and mood. Breathing also uniquely engages in a reciprocal relationship with stress and anxiety, whereas stress and anxiety can both affect and be affected by altered respiratory patterns. So just in terms of any of the things that we've discussed in the past, I hope that you are all familiar with some form of diaphragmatic breathing, some form of paced slow breathing, right? Slow down your breath. We've actually specifically looked at studies of slowing down the breath. Breathing with biofeedback, such as heart math, where you have a biofeedback regulator, right? Like a heart rate variability monitor. And so your biofeedback is your heart rate variability, and we've seen there's an increase in that heart rate variability when we perform breathing exercises, when we perform parasympathetically induced breathing exercises. Okay. So hopefully you're familiar. We've also covered alternate nostril breathing. Okay, we've done, and we've talked a lot about the autonomic nervous system, right? And that parasympathetic tone, or that vagal tone, referring to the vagus nerve, and how we're toning the vagus nerve, right? Imagine the tone, the nerve being like a cord or a string on a musical instrument, and if it's flabby and floppy, it's not going to give you a nice sound, right? You go to a guitar and the string is all floppy, you twang it and it goes dong, right? That doesn't give you a sound. And then you tighten it, and what are you doing? You're causing an increased tone to that string. Right. And that's exactly actually what you're doing to your vagus nerve or your parasympathetic system, is you're actually tightening it. You're making it more responsive, not reactive, responsive. You're making it be able to respond. It comes on when it's needed and it let goes when it's not. A perfect dynamic balance, right? The sympathetic nervous system is needed. If our life is in danger, you know what? I want to react. Okay. But then I also need to understand when I can respond. When do I need to respond with higher order cognitive functions and abilities? Okay. And that's actually part of it comes from tuning or increasing the vagal tone or the parasympathetic tone. So you hear this language in these articles. All right. This article was published November 21st, 2023. November 21st, 2023. So, so far, really good stuff. Things that everybody should be familiar with if you've been, listening here or coming to any of our talks. These are the studies they included, considered any voluntary, regulated breathing practice as its own intervention, whether part of the treatment or a control. We excluded interventions that used breath practices in combination with other interventions such as yoga, meditation, tai chi. We included interventions that used metronomes or visual audio cues for guiding breathing pace, and excluded those in which a device provided real-time biofeedback, such as data or expelled carbon dioxide, respiratory rate, heart rate variability, etc. We excluded interventions that incorporated means outside of participants' direct control to manipulate or regulate participants' oxygen or CO2 intake. All right, so those are the studies that you can tell, right? So already you're thinking, oh, why would they have excluded that? Why would they have included that? Might be in your in what you might be thinking. Okay. So here, to me, before we get into our practice, within the 58 studies, 72 breathing interventions met our inclusion criteria were identified. 72. Imagine, right? 72 different breathing interventions. You're thinking to yourself, oh, I tried that one. Well, there's 71 other ones, right? That's what's the beauty of this. That's why I feel like you could never get enough information or enough practice in the breath, because if one didn't work for you, try another one. Try a different one. There's gonna be something out there that's it's gonna hit. I guarantee you. Okay. They found 72 that were published. Not only that, like, people crazily thought, they're like, oh, let's do this, and this, right? These are actually 72 that are published. So just think of how many there are that aren't published, right? Okay. Hey, I talked to my friend who just did this breathing practice. Oh, I never heard of that one. I studied all the 72 that were published. This is the 73rd. Okay. 54 such interventions significantly reduced participant stress and anxiety. The most common type of breathing intervention was general, slow breathing, which was included in 36 of the studies. General, slow breathing. What have I been saying for so long here? If you don't do anything with your breath, just breathe slower. That's it. Okay, that's it. Try to breathe with your nose if you can. If you can't, no big deal. But just breathe slower. All right. The evidence is building so much with slow breathing. It's profound. Again, if it was a medication, we'd all be on it. guaranteed. The second most common selection was deep diaphragmatic breathing, followed by fast breathing, alternate or unilateral nostril breathing, breathing with holds and pauses, extended exhale breathing, normal rate breathing, and paced or pursed lip breathing. Those were the most common. Okay. Slow breathing was number 1. Deep diaphragmatic breathing, number 2. Fast breathing, number 3. Alternate nostril or unilateral nostril breathing, number 4. Breathing with holds or pauses. Extended exhale breathing, normal rate breathing, and paced or pursed lips breathing. Right? We've done all of those, except for fast breathing. Maybe we did fast breathing for about 20 seconds, but you actually felt your nervous system maybe getting a little activated, and so I asked you to stop doing it. Okay. All right. There are some, like holotropic breath work, that has a rapid breathing rate, all right? In and out, and you can take no pause between the inhale and the exhale, and it's a fairly rapid breathing rate. Okay. So this is what they studied. It probably took them much analysis. Okay. And what they did, I love it, right? So what they did is, so I'm not going to go through it because I'd like to get into a practice. What they did is essentially they came up with a conceptual framework of effective stress reduction breathing practices. Okay, this is an effective framework of stress reduction breathing practices, and I recommend you going to the article and taking a look, but we'll talk about it here. Components of an effective breath practices. They say what to avoid and what to include. Avoid purely fast breathing. Okay. Right. If we're trying to reduce anxiety and stress from a mechanistic perspective, let's try to avoid purely fast breathing. In fact, people go into a fast breathing state when they are anxious and stressed. A session duration of less than 5 minutes. Okay. What to include? A human-guided training in at least one session, in at least the first session. Have somebody guide you through one session, and then you can do all the other ones yourself if you need it, right? This is kind of their recommendations. Doing multiple sessions and having a long-term practice. Long-term practice. Okay. What they defined a long-term practice as is performing 6 or more sessions over 1 or more weeks. 6 or more sessions over 1 or more weeks. So if you look at this, right, session duration of less than 5 minutes, notice that there's a less than. There's not a less than and or equal sign to it. I don't make this stuff up, but I do look at the research and I do look at the data, okay? And here's the funny part about this, right? I had never seen this article. This article was published on the 23rd of November, or whatever it is. Really, really, really recent. And they just have a less than 5 minutes, which means my recommendations of doing 5 minutes still holds because that is more than less than 5 minutes. Right? They don't have the equal sign there. They don't have the less than and equal because studies have actually been looked at for 5 minutes. For 5 minutes of studies. And for years, what has my recommendation been? At least do 5 minutes. Do 5 minutes a day. Right? So that hits then not only the 5 minutes a day, but also the long term. Because it's greater than 6 times for greater than 1 week, right? 5 minutes, right? And going into, again, you have 285-minute intervals in a 24-hour day. And you can take one of those minutes, one of those intervals, one of those 280 intervals to do this practice. right? So those are their recommendations from all these studies that they looked at, all these studies that they put together, looking at all the results. Okay, include a human guided training of at least first session, multiple sessions, which are greater than 6 sessions over greater than 1 week, 1 week or longer, and a long-term practice. Okay. Try to avoid purely fast breathing, and then a session that is less than 5 minutes, a session that is less than 5 minutes. Some of the caveats, all right, and this kind of more looks at, just sort of like, hey, you might not want to do it. Avoid in the practice, so you don't want to stand too much. When you do breathing practices, sometimes you can feel dizzy. You don't want to have too many interruptions. Involuntary diaphragm immobilization or obstruction. So this is where your diaphragm is actually immobilized or obstructive. And then highly technical practices without training or experiences. See, even they say, get rid of the highly technical practice. We don't need it. It's just somebody probably trying to sell you something that you don't need. That probably, as we get in tune with our own body, we can actually tell how the practice is going by just perceiving inward and seeing how it's going for our body. And then this is some of those things to include in the research, which include blinded practice guides, accountability for home practice, continued practice through measurement period, but mostly looking at the components of an effective practice. Okay, to include one human guided training, at least in the first session, to include multiple sessions and a long-term practice, trying to avoid purely fast breathing, and a session duration of less than 5 minutes, Okay, so beautiful, right? Here it is, just published approximately 2 weeks ago or so, looking at breathing practices for stress and anxiety. The number of interventions, first of all, that have been looked at, number one, okay, 72, right, different breathing interventions, of which over 75%, is that 75%? I guess that would be, 65%, over 65% are efficacious. Okay. The ones that are efficacious, looking at the ones that you do them, the ones that you repeat, right? The ones where you can repeat. We don't get bogged down with high-tech things, all right? Ones that you feel like, find one that you feel comfortable with doing. Do it for 5 minutes. Got it? All right. So, are there any questions with that? Because it continues to come up, and it's going to be profound. It is already profound. And so if you don't have some form of breathing practice, please start to look for one, find one, see what works for you. And it's exactly as the authors say. There's a power that is associated with having this practice and essentially being able to carry it wherever you go, everywhere. That it's universal, that everybody can do it, that it doesn't depend on your insurance or your healthcare costs or, how much money is in your bank account or anything like that. That you can do it at the top of the skyscraper, at the bottom of a cave. That you can do it at any time. And so why not learn a practice like this that helps with stress and anxiety, given all the stress and anxiety that is happening in the world and the imbalance of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system that is essentially an epidemic at this time, because we're not teaching practices that help regulate the parasympathetic nervous system. The practice is going to be us getting up and dancing. No, it's going to be the breath. Okay, so let's find a comfortable posture. A posture you feel relaxed yet alert. Closing your eyes if you feel comfortable closing your eyes. If not, having a soft downward gaze. And giving yourself this moment to be here right now. And taking 2 or 3 deep breaths. And really feeling the sensation of the breath coming into our body and letting it go. Feeling the sensation of the breath leaving. And just noticing the cyclical pattern of the sensations that occur wherever you feel the breath the most in your body. Coming and going, receiving and letting go, receiving and letting go. Each breath teaching us about impermanence, the coming and going of the moment of the breath, the receiving of the in-breath and allowing it to come in, and the letting go of the out-breath. Releasing it to the world. As we breathe, seeing if we can ever so slightly breathe a little bit slower. Not where you feel like you are out of breath. Just see if you can slow down your breath. Still noticing the sensations of your breath as they come and go wherever you feel it the most. In and out. In and out. maintaining your attention on your breath as best you can, on the sensation of your breath as it comes and goes. If you wish, counting each breath, inhale and exhale. Or as Thich Nhat Hanh says, in, I know I am breathing in. Out, I know I am breathing out. In, I know I am breathing in. Out, I know I am breathing out. And just notice what your natural breathing rhythm is now. Where are your pauses between inhale and exhale? Where do you feel the sensation of the breath in your body? Is it more localized or has it dispersed throughout more body areas? Just simply noticing. And with that, as we bring this meditation to a close, simply noticing how you feel right now in your body with no judgment. And just asking yourself if you can incorporate your breath into your daily life. Maybe taking slow, deep breaths anytime you think of it. And so taking 2 or 3 deep breaths, really feeling that breath coming in, going out. Opening your eyes if your eyes were closed. And just taking a moment to reflect on your practice.